I'm standing in a small coffee shop in Makati, and my hands won't stop shaking. The phone feels heavy in my palm. I've checked the time maybe 20 times in the last 5 minutes. She's late. Or maybe I'm early. I can't tell anymore. My name is Cecil. I'm 67 years old, and I drove trucks across Idaho for 42 years before I retired. I'm not the kind of man who does things like this. I don't fly halfway across the world to meet women I've only talked to online. But 6 months ago, my daughter Brenda stopped returning my calls, and my house started feeling like a place where I was just waiting to die. Then Flor sent me a message. Just a simple hello on one of those international dating sites I'd joined out of loneliness more than hope. She said I had kind eyes. Nobody had said anything like that to me in years. Not since my ex-wife left me 15 years ago, taking half of everything and all of my confidence with her. Flor and I talked every day after that. She'd send me pictures of Manila, of her office, of the little coffee shop near her apartment. She'd ask about Idaho, about the mountains, about what it was like to drive through snow. She called me handsome. She called me interesting. She made me feel like I wasn't invisible anymore. So when she said she'd love to meet me if I ever came to the Philippines, I bought a ticket the same day. And now I'm here, in this cramped little shop that smells like burnt sugar and espresso, and the door opens. She walks in, and I forget how to breathe. She's smaller than I imagined, maybe 5'2", with long black hair that falls past her shoulders and skin that seems to glow even in the dim lighting. She's wearing a simple blue dress, and when she sees me, her face lights up, not a polite smile, a real one. She walks straight to my table, and before I can even stand, she takes both my hands in hers. "Cecil," she says, and her voice is softer than it sounded over the phone. "I'm so happy you came." I try to say something, anything, but all I manage is a nod. She sits across from me, still holding one of my hands, and I realize I'm staring. "You're more handsome in person," she says, and I feel my face get hot. "I was worried the pictures were, old or something." "They're from last year," I say, and my voice cracks a little. She laughs, not at me, but like she's genuinely delighted. "I'm just teasing. You look good, Cecil. Really good." We talk for 2 hours. She tells me about her job as a marketing assistant, how she handles social media for a small company in Makati, how the pay isn't great but she likes the work. She talks about her mother who lives in Laguna, about how she sends money home every month, about how she dreams of starting her own business someday. I tell her about Idaho, about the long highways and the quiet, about how retirement feels like freedom and loneliness at the same time. She listens like every word matters. When I admit I haven't spoken to my daughter in almost a year, she reaches across the table and squeezes my hand. "That must be so hard," she says, and there are actual tears in her eyes. Family is everything. I believe her. I believe all of it. When we leave the coffee shop, she loops her arm through mine like we've known each other for years, and I think maybe this is what I came here for. Maybe this is what I've been missing. I was supposed to stay in Manila for 1 week. That was the plan. See the city, meet Flor, figure out if what we had online translated to real life. But by day 3, I'd already pushed my flight back. By day 7, I'd extended it another 2 weeks. She showed me her Manila, not the tourist version, the real one. We rode jeepneys through traffic that made me grip the seat so hard my knuckles turned white, and she laughed at my face the whole time. "You're safe, baby," she'd say, patting my arm. "Trust me." We ate at little restaurants where I couldn't read the menu and she ordered for both of us. Adobo, sinigang, lumpia, things I couldn't pronounce but that tasted better than anything I'd had back home. She'd watch me try each dish, her face so hopeful, and when I said I liked something, she'd beam like I'd just given her a gift. One afternoon we walked through Rizal Park, and she told me about Philippine history, about heroes I'd never heard of, about a pride in her country that I'd lost somewhere along the way in mine. I found myself imagining what it would be like to live here, to wake up every morning and see her face, to be part of something again instead of just existing. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, catching me staring at her. "Nothing." I said, but she tilted her head, smiling. Liar. I'm thinking I don't want to leave. Her smile changed then, got softer. She took my hand. Then don't, she said. That night, we were having dinner at a small restaurant near her apartment when her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and something flickered across her face. Excuse me, baby, she said, standing. Just 1 second. She walked outside, and I watched her through the window. She was talking fast, gesturing with her free hand, and her expression was tight. Worried, maybe, or annoyed. I couldn't tell. When she came back, the smile was there again, but it felt different. Practiced. Everything okay? I asked. Of course, baby, she said, sliding back into her seat. Just family stress. My mom, you know. Always something. I wanted to ask more, but she changed the subject, asked me about Montana, mixed it up with Idaho, and I spent the next 10 minutes explaining the difference while she laughed at herself. By the time we finished eating, I'd forgotten about the phone call entirely. Later that week, she took me to her favorite mall, and we walked through stores that sold everything from clothes to electronics to live fish in giant tanks. She stopped in front of a small boutique, staring at a purse in the window. That's beautiful, she said quietly, almost to herself. You like it? I asked. She shook her head quickly. It's too expensive. I was just looking. I checked the price tag. 8,000 pesos. About $150. I could afford that. Let me buy it for you. No, Cecil, she said, pulling me away from the window. You already paid for dinner, for everything. I can't let you. I want to, I said, and I meant it. I wanted to see her face light up. I wanted to be the reason she smiled. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she kissed me on the cheek. Soft, brief, but it burned into my skin like a brand. You're too good to me, she whispered. I bought her the purse. She carried it out of the store like it was made of glass, and for the rest of the day, she kept touching my arm, leaning into me, calling me sweet. That night, lying alone in my hotel room, I stared at the ceiling and thought about what Tom would say if he could see me now. Tom, my old coworker from the trucking company, the one who told me I was crazy for even thinking about meeting someone online. But Tom was divorced 3 times and bitter about everything. What did he know about taking chances? What did he know about feeling alive again? I extended my trip another week. Flor called me one morning, her voice bright and energetic. Baby, I want you to meet someone, she said. My cousin Rodell. He's been asking about you. I met him that afternoon at a restaurant in Quezon City. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-20s, with gelled hair and a sharp smile. He shook my hand hard, too hard, like he was trying to prove something. Sir Cecil, he said, and the way he said it made me feel like a client, not family. Flor talks about you all the time, sir, all the time. Good things, I hope, I said, trying to match his energy. Oh, yes, sir. Very good things. He sat down across from us, and immediately his phone was out, his fingers moving across the screen. Flor didn't seem bothered by it. She just smiled and squeezed my hand under the table. Rodell started joining us for meals after that. Lunches, dinners, coffee in between. He was always polite, always called me sir, always paid attention when I talked. But there was something about him I couldn't pin down. He'd look at Flor in a way that felt like communication, like they were having a conversation I wasn't part of. What does Rodell do? I asked Flor one evening after he'd left. He's in business, she said vaguely. Helps me with some things, you know. Family things. What kind of things? Just, like, investments, planning, boring stuff. She kissed my cheek. Don't worry about it, baby. He's harmless. But I did worry about it. Not because I thought something was wrong, but because I didn't understand. And not understanding made me feel old and out of place. One afternoon, I went to pick up Flor from her office, and I saw them in the parking lot. Her and Rodell. They were standing close, talking in Tagalog, and Flor looked upset. She was gesturing with her hands, shaking her head, and Rodell had his arms crossed, speaking low and fast. When they saw me approaching, they stopped. Rodell's face split into that same sharp smile. "Sir Cecil." "Perfect timing, sir." Flor looped her arm through mine immediately, her expression smoothing out. "Ready to go, baby? Everything all right?" I asked. "Yes, of course," she said brightly. "Just family things. You know how it is." Rodell clapped me on the shoulder. "Family is complicated, sir. But we take care of each other. That's what matters, yes?" I nodded, but the unease sat heavy in my chest. That night, we were lying in her apartment, the fan spinning lazily overhead, and she turned to me. "Baby," she said softly, "can I ask you something? Anything." She hesitated, biting her lower lip. "My mom. She's been sick. Not serious, but she needs some tests. The hospital is asking for 50,000 pesos up front, and I don't have it right now. My next paycheck isn't for 2 weeks, and I already sent her money last month." I felt my stomach tighten. Not from suspicion, from the chance to help, to matter. "How much is that in dollars?" "About 900, she said quietly, looking down at her hands. "I'll pay you back, I promise. I don't know who else to ask." "Don't be ridiculous," I said, sitting up. "You're not paying me back. Let me help." Her eyes filled with tears. Real ones. They spilled over, and she pressed her face against my chest. "You're so good, Cecil. I don't deserve you. I transferred the money the next morning." She cried again when she got the confirmation, held my face in her hands and kissed me like I'd just saved her life. And for a moment, I felt like a hero. Like I wasn't just some old man who'd driven trucks and retired to an empty house. I was someone who mattered, someone who could make a difference. The doubts I'd felt about Rodell melted away. This was love. This was family. This was what I came here for. Flor told me we were driving to Laguna to visit her mother. "She's been asking about you," Flor said, her hand on my knee as we sat in traffic that barely moved. "She wants to meet the man who's been taking care of her daughter." I felt nervous. Not the bad kind, the good kind. The kind you feel when you're about to meet someone who matters. We drove for hours, past rice fields and small towns where kids played in the streets and chickens wandered across the road. When we finally arrived, the house was small, a single-story concrete structure with a corrugated tin roof and a yard where laundry hung on a line and chickens pecked at the dirt. Flor's mother, Maricar, came out before we even parked. She was a small woman, maybe in her late 50s, with streaks of gray in her hair and the same warm smile as her daughter. "Kuya Cecil," she called, using a term I'd learned meant older brother. She pulled me into a hug before I could even introduce myself. "Welcome, welcome. Come inside, come inside." The house was simple but clean. A small living room with mismatched furniture, a kitchen that opened to the back, faded photos on the walls of Flor as a little girl. Maricar sat me down at a table and immediately started bringing out food. Pancit, lechon, rice, more than 2 people could ever eat. "Mama, that's too much," Flor said, laughing. "Nonsense," Maricar said, waving her off. "He's a guest, a special guest." She sat across from me, folding her hands. "Flor tells me you helped with my hospital bills." I glanced at Flor, who was suddenly very focused on her plate. "It was nothing," I said. "Family helps family." Maricar's eyes filled with tears. She reached across and squeezed my hand. "You are a blessing, Kuya Cecil. A blessing. I prayed for someone good for my daughter, and God sent you." I felt my throat tighten. I hadn't been called a blessing in my entire life. After lunch, Maricar walked me around the property, showing me her vegetable garden, the small shrine in the corner of the yard. She talked about her late husband, about how he died 5 years ago and left them with debt, about how Flor had worked so hard to support her and her younger brother. "She's a good girl," Maricar said, wiping her eyes. "The best daughter a mother could have. But she sacrifices too much." Later, when we were alone in the yard, Flor stood close to me, her voice quiet. "Mama needs a new roof," she said, pointing up at the rusted tin. "When it rains, water comes through. She puts buckets everywhere. And my brother, he wants to go to college, but tuition is so expensive, and there's still debt from my father, from the funeral, from everything." She wasn't asking. She was just telling me, just letting me know. "How much would all of that cost?" I asked. She looked at me, surprised. "Baby, I'm not asking you for money. I know. I'm asking you. How much?" She calculated in her head, her lips moving silently. "Maybe 200,000 pesos. For the roof, for tuition, for the debt. But that's too much. I can't ask you for that. You're not asking. I'm offering." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. "That's about $4,000. I can do that." Flor grabbed my arm. "Cecil, no. That's too much. I can't let you. You're not letting me. I'm doing it because I want to. Because this is what people do when they care about each other." Her face crumpled, and she buried it in my chest. "You're an angel," she whispered. "I don't know what I did to deserve you. I sent the money that week." Maricar called me, crying so hard I could barely understand her, thanking me, blessing me, calling me son. Flor held me every night like I was something precious, something irreplaceable, and I told myself this is what love looks like. Sacrifice, generosity, taking care of the people who matter. I told myself I was building something real, a family, a future, a reason to keep waking up. I didn't see the cracks forming. Or maybe I did, and I just chose to ignore them. Because admitting I was wrong meant admitting I was a fool. And I wasn't ready for that yet. I met Tom at a bar in Ermita, one of those expat places where the beer is cheap and everyone speaks English with an American accent softened by years abroad. He was sitting at the bar alone, nursing a San Miguel, and when I sat down next to him, he gave me the kind of nod that said he knew exactly who I was without me saying a word. "Let me guess," he said, his voice rough from cigarettes and too many years in the heat. "You're here for a girl?" I bristled. "I'm here visiting someone, yeah." "How long you been seeing her?" he asked, turning to face me. He was maybe 62, weathered, with the look of a man who'd seen it all and wasn't impressed by any of it. 6 months online, a month in person. He laughed, not meanly but knowingly, like I'd just confirmed something he'd already figured out. "Let me guess, you've sent money, met the family. She's got a cousin who's always around. There's always some emergency, some bill, some debt that needs paying." My jaw tightened. "It's not like that. Brother, it's always like that. You don't know her," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "You don't know anything about her." Tom sipped his beer, unbothered. "I don't need to know her. I've been here 10 years. I'm married to a Filipina, a good one, but I've seen 100 guys like you come through, and I've seen 100 stories that end the same way. And how's that? Broken alone." I stood up. "Thanks for the advice, but I didn't ask for it." He shrugged. "Suit yourself. But do me a favor. Check her phone. Watch who she talks to when you're not around. See if the story changes." I walked out, my chest tight with anger, with defensiveness, with something I didn't want to name. Flor was different. She loved me. I knew she did. But that night, lying in bed next to her, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Once, twice, 3 times. She stirred but didn't wake. I stared at it in the darkness, the screen glowing faintly, and I thought about Tom's words, "Check her phone." I reached for it. My hand hovered inches away, then I pulled back. I didn't need to check. I trusted her. I had to trust her, because if I didn't, then what was I even doing here? But sleep didn't come easy that night, and when it did, I dreamed of empty bank accounts and voices speaking in languages I didn't understand. Flor brought it up over breakfast one morning, casual, like she was suggesting we go to the mall. "Baby, I've been thinking," she said, pouring me coffee. "What if I came to visit you in Idaho?" I looked up, surprised. "Visit?" "Yeah. Or maybe, I don't know, stay for a while. See what it's like. I've never seen snow. She smiled, but there was something careful in her eyes. Would you want that? Of course I'd want that, I said, my heart suddenly pounding. But the visa process, it's complicated, isn't it? It is, she admitted, but it's not impossible. We just need to apply, get all the documents together, show that I have a reason to return. It takes time and money, but it's doable. The idea took root in my mind immediately. Flor in Idaho, Flor in my house, Flor cooking in my kitchen, sleeping in my bed, being part of my life not just for weeks but maybe forever. It was everything I'd been too afraid to hope for. How much would it cost? I asked. She shook her head. Don't worry about it. I'll save up. Flor, how much? She hesitated, then pulled out her phone and showed me a list. Application fees, embassy fees, document processing, translation services, travel history proof, financial statements, about $12,000, she said quietly. But we can do it slowly, bit by bit. $12,000, a huge chunk of my savings, but not unmanageable, not for this, not for her. Let's do it, I said. Her eyes widened. Cecil, that's a lot of money. I don't care. I want you there. I want you with me. She stood up and wrapped her arms around me, burying her face in my neck. I'm so lucky to have you, she whispered. We started the process that week. She found a lawyer, Attorney Reyes, who specialized in U.S. visa applications. He explained everything in detail, the forms, the interviews, the requirements. It sounded legitimate. It sounded real. I paid the initial fees, $12,000 wired to the lawyer's office. Flor was grateful, emotional, kept telling me this was just the beginning of our real life together. We celebrated at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city, and she held my hand and talked about snow, about mountains, about starting over. I'll learn to cook American food, she said, laughing. I'll make you pancakes every morning. I like your cooking, I said. I don't need pancakes. You'll need something to keep you warm in all that snow. She leaned across the table and kissed me, and I felt like the luckiest man alive. But 2 weeks later, Attorney Reyes called. Mr. Cecil, there's a complication with the application. We need additional documentation, additional fees. It's about $3,000 more. I paid it. A month after that, another call. The embassy requires updated financial statements, more fees, another $4,000. Then it was travel history documentation. Then it was expedited processing because the timelines were tight, $5,000 more. Each time, Flor would sit next to me, her face apologetic, her hand on my arm. I'm so sorry, baby. I didn't think it would be this expensive. We can stop if you want. I don't want you to feel pressured. But I was already in too deep. I'd spent over $30,000. Stopping now meant losing it all. Just a little more. I'd say, my voice steady even as my savings account drained. We're almost there. She'd hug me, kiss me, tell me how much she loved me, and I'd believe her, because I had to. One night, lying awake, I checked my account balance on my phone. I'd started this trip with $280,000, 40 years of work, 40 years of saving, of living carefully, of planning for a retirement I thought I'd spend alone. Now I was down to $190,000, $90,000 in 3 months. The number made my stomach turn, but Flor was asleep next to me, her head on my chest, her breathing soft and even, and I told myself it was worth it. That love cost something. That building a life together required sacrifice. I told myself a lot of things that night. I'm not sure I believed any of them anymore. Attorney Reyes called me on a Wednesday morning. His voice was formal, careful. Mr. Cecil, can you come to my office today? There's something we need to discuss in person. Is everything okay with the visa? I asked, my chest tightening. It's better if we talk face to face, sir. I went alone. Flor was at work, and something in Reyes' tone made me think I should hear this by myself first. His office was small, cramped with file cabinets and stacks of folders. He gestured for me to sit, and then he sat across from me, his hands folded on the desk. "Mr. Cecil," he began, his voice measured, "I need to be honest with you. Miss Flor has been applying for U.S. visas under 3 different sponsorships in the past 2 years. Yours is the third. The air left my lungs." "What?" He opened a folder and slid documents across the desk. Forms, applications, different names, different men, different dates. The first was 2 years ago, an American man from California. The application was denied. The second was last year, a British man, also denied. Now yours. I stared at the papers, my vision blurring. "Are you sure this is her?" "Positive, sir. Same full name, same birth date, same identification." My hands were shaking. Did she take money from them too?" Reyes's face softened. "I don't know the details of those arrangements, sir. But based on the pattern and the fact that none of these applications were genuine attempts, I believe she's been using the visa process to obtain funds." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "I don't think she intends to go to the United States with you, Mr. Cecil," Reyes said gently. "I think she's using the money for something else. I felt it was my ethical duty to inform you before you spend more." "How much more is there?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "She told me we're almost done. There is no more, sir. The application was never going to succeed. The documentation she provided was insufficient from the beginning. I've been processing fees, yes, but the visa itself was never viable." I sat there, frozen, while the world collapsed around me. All that money, all that hope, all those nights lying awake convincing myself this was real. "Do you want to proceed?" Reyes asked. I shook my head. "No," he nodded. "I understand, sir. I'm sorry." I walked out of his office into the heat and noise of Manila, and I felt like I was disappearing, like I was becoming transparent, insubstantial, a ghost haunting his own life. I didn't go back to Flor's apartment. I got a hotel room in Malate, something cheap and anonymous. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. My phone buzzed. "Flor, baby, where are you? Are you okay?" I didn't answer. It buzzed again. And again. I turned it off. That night, I lay in the dark and did the math. $280,000 when I started. $12,000 for initial visa fees. $4,000 for Maricar's roof and her son's tuition and the family debt. 50,000 pesos here, 70,000 there, dinners, gifts, the purse, the phone I bought her, the laptop she needed for work, then the visa fees that kept coming. 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. When I added it all up, I'd spent over $120,000 in 4 months. I had $160,000 left, at 67 years old, with no job, no pension beyond Social Security, no plan. I'd given her nearly half of everything I had, and none of it was real. None of it was ever real. I thought about calling Brenda, my daughter, the one I hadn't spoken to in over a year because she'd warned me about this exact thing and I'd been too proud, too defensive, too sure she was wrong to listen. I sat in that hotel room with my phone in my hand, her contact pulled up on the screen, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't call her and say, "You were right." I was stupid. I fell for the oldest trick in the book. My thumb hovered over her name. I could almost hear her voice. Not angry, which would have been easier, just sad, disappointed, that tone that said she'd expected better from me. I put the phone down. I'd humiliated myself enough without adding that to the list. The room was dark, musty, the air conditioner rattling in the window. I'd paid for 3 nights in advance. $25 a night. It was all I could stomach spending now. Everything felt expensive suddenly. Every meal, every peso, every breath. I'd become a man who calculated the cost of existing. I opened my banking app and stared at the number. $160,000. 40 years of work reduced to 6 digits. I'd driven trucks through blizzards, through 100-degree heat, through nights when I was so tired I could barely see the road. I'd lived in a small house, driven old cars, skipped vacations, saved every extra dollar because I thought I was building security, building a future. Now I had this, and at 67, there was no getting it back. No do-overs, no second chances to save smarter, work harder, be less foolish. I thought about the house in Idaho, the yard I'd let go, the neighbors I'd stopped talking to, Brenda's last visit 3 years ago, when she'd sat on my couch and told me I seemed lonely, and I'd brushed it off because admitting it felt like admitting defeat. But I was lonely. I'd been lonely for years. And when Flor came along with her messages, her pictures, her voice telling me I was handsome, interesting, worth knowing, I'd grabbed onto it like a drowning man grabbing a rope. I didn't ask questions, didn't look closer, didn't want to see anything that might take it away, because having something, even something false, felt better than having nothing at all. That was the truth I couldn't say out loud. I'd known something was off, the phone calls she'd step outside for, Rodell always being around, the requests that kept coming, the visa process that never seemed to end. I'd known. I just hadn't wanted to know. There's a difference. I pulled up the calculator on my phone. $160,000. If I was careful, if I lived small, if I didn't need anything beyond the basics, it might last me 10 years, maybe 12. Social Security would help, but not much, not enough. I'd be 77 by then, 79. And then what? I closed the app. I couldn't think about it anymore. Flor called again. I'd turned my phone back on out of habit, and it buzzed in my hand. I stared at her name on the screen. Part of me wanted to answer, wanted to hear her voice, wanted her to say something that would make this make sense, that would prove Reyes was wrong, that would let me go back to believing. But I knew what she'd say. She'd cry. She'd apologize. She'd tell me there was an explanation, and maybe part of it would even be true. Maybe she did care about me in some small, transactional way. Maybe she did feel something when she kissed me, held me, called me baby. But it didn't matter, because whatever she felt, it wasn't enough to stop her from taking everything I had. I let it go to voicemail. Then I deleted it without listening. I sat there until the sun came up, until the heat started creeping back in through the walls, until I heard people moving around in the hallway outside, and I realized I couldn't stay in Manila. I couldn't stay in this city where every street reminded me of her, where every restaurant we'd eaten at was just another place I'd been played. I needed to leave. I needed to go home, even if home was just an empty house I'd abandoned for a fantasy. I went back to Flor's apartment one last time. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I wanted to confront her. Maybe I just wanted to see her face and confirm that everything Reyes had told me was true. I used the key she'd given me weeks ago, when things were still good, when I still believed. The apartment was quiet when I opened the door. Empty. I thought maybe she was at work, but then I heard voices from the bedroom. Low, casual. I should have left right then, but I didn't. I walked down the short hallway, and when I pushed the door open, I saw Rodell sitting on the edge of the bed, and next to him, a guy I'd never seen before. Mid-20s, fit, wearing a polo shirt I recognized. I'd bought it for Flor a month ago. Light blue, expensive. They both froze when they saw me. The guy stood up fast, his face going pale. Rodell's mouth opened, but nothing came out. "Who are you?" the guy asked, his voice tight. I almost laughed. "I'm Cecil. Who are you?" Rodell finally found his voice. "Sir Cecil, this is a misunderstanding, sir." "What's a misunderstanding?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. "That he's wearing the shirt I bought? Or that he's in her apartment?" The guy looked at Rodell, then back at me. "My name is James. I'm Flor's boyfriend." Boyfriend. The word hung in the air like smoke. I waited for the anger, the rage, the need to yell, to break something, to make them feel even a fraction of what I was feeling. But it didn't come. All I felt was tired. "How long?" I asked. James shifted uncomfortably. 2 years. 2 years. While she was messaging me. While she was telling me she loved me. While she was planning a future in Idaho that was never going to happen. Did she tell you about me? I asked. He hesitated. Some. Did she tell you I gave her over $100,000? His face changed. Surprise. Maybe guilt. Maybe pity. I couldn't tell anymore. I didn't know it was that much, he said quietly. Rodell stepped forward. Sir, please, let's talk about this. Flor, she cares about you, sir. She does. This is just complicated. I looked at him, really looked at him. His expensive phone, his designer sneakers, the watch on his wrist that probably cost more than I made in a month when I was still driving trucks. How much did you get? I asked. He blinked. Sir? How much of my money did you get, Rodell? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I turned and walked out of the bedroom. James called after me. Sir, wait, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was like this. I kept walking, out of the apartment, down the stairs, into the street where the heat hit me like a wall and the noise swallowed everything. My phone started ringing before I even made it to the corner. Flor, I answered this time. Cecil, baby, where are you? Her voice was panicked, breathless. I went to your hotel, but you weren't there. Please talk to me. I was just at your apartment, I said. Silence. Then, oh God, Cecil, please, let me explain. Explain what? That James exists? That you've been lying to me for 6 months? That the visa was never real? It's not like that, she said, and I could hear her crying now. Cecil, please. I do care about you. I do. This is just, it's complicated. Did you ever plan to come to Idaho? I wanted to, she said, her voice breaking. I wanted to, but things changed, and I didn't know how to tell you. Things changed. You mean you got enough money and didn't need me anymore? No, that's not fair. You don't understand. My family, they needed help. I was drowning. You were kind to me. You were so kind, and I didn't know how to stop. You didn't want to stop. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. Are you leaving? Yes. Can I see you? One more time? Please? No. Cecil, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I hung up. She called back. 10 times. 15. I lost count. Each time, I sent it to voicemail. She texted. Long messages. Short ones. Voice messages I didn't listen to. Baby, please. Let me explain. It's not what you think. I love you. Please don't go. But it was exactly what I thought. And whatever love she felt, it wasn't the kind that mattered. I booked a flight home for 3 days later, the soonest I could get, and I spent those 3 days alone in that hotel room, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how I'd become this person. This man who'd flown across the world and handed over his entire future to someone who saw him as nothing more than an opportunity. The flight back to Idaho felt longer than the one to Manila, even though it was the exact same route. 15 hours to San Francisco, then another 2 to Boise. I sat in my seat, stared out the window at clouds that looked like they went on forever, and tried not to think, but thinking was all I could do. I kept replaying moments. The way Flor smiled at me in that coffee shop, the way she held my hand in Rizal Park, the way she cried when I sent money for her mother. Were any of those moments real? Or was every single one calculated, rehearsed, performed? I didn't know anymore. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. When I landed in Boise, the air was cold and dry, so different from Manila's thick heat that it felt like stepping onto another planet. I picked up my truck from long-term parking. It started on the first try, and I drove the 2 hours back to my house in silence. No music, no radio, just the hum of the engine and the sound of tires on asphalt. When I pulled into my driveway, it was late afternoon. The yard was overgrown, the grass knee-high in places, the mailbox was overflowing. Someone had left a note on my door from the HOA about the lawn. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house smelled stale, closed up, like nobody had lived there in months, because nobody had. I'd left in early February thinking I'd be gone a week. It was now late June, almost 5 months. I dropped my bag by the door and walked through the rooms. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. The coffee mug on the kitchen counter, the book on the side table, the pile of mail I hadn't gotten to before I left. It felt like walking through a museum of my old life. I sat down in my recliner, the one I'd spent so many nights in before Flor, and I stared at the blank TV screen. My reflection stared back, an old man, tired, stupid, alone. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. $160,000. The number hadn't changed. I'd checked it so many times on the flight that I'd memorized it. $160,000 at 67 years old. I thought about the truck I'd driven for 40 years, the roads I'd memorized, the diners I'd stopped at, the motels I'd slept in, the hours I'd spent alone in the cab with nothing but the radio and my thoughts. I'd been lonely then too, but it was a different kind of lonely. It was the kind you could live with because you told yourself it was temporary, that someday you'd retire and things would be different, that there was still time to build something. Now I was here, and the loneliness was worse because I knew exactly how much I'd paid trying to escape it. I thought about calling Brenda again. My thumb hovered over her contact. This time, I pressed it. It rang 4 times. I almost hung up. Then her voice. Dad? Careful, cautious, like she wasn't sure it was really me. Hi, Brenda. Silence. Then, where are you? Home. I'm back in Idaho. When did you get back? Today. More silence. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, deciding what to say, how to say it. Are you okay? She asked finally. And that question, simple as it was, broke something in me. No, I said, my voice cracking. No, I'm not okay. She was quiet. I heard her move, a door closing in the background. What happened, Dad? I was wrong, I said. About everything, about her, about all of it. You were right. You tried to warn me, and I wouldn't listen. Dad, I'm sorry, I said, and I felt tears on my face for the first time in years. I'm so sorry, Brenda. I was so stupid. I thought she loved me. I thought I was building something. But I wasn't. I was just being used. How much did you lose? She asked quietly. I told her. She didn't say anything for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick. Oh, Dad, I know. Are you going to be okay? Financially? I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe. If I'm careful. If nothing goes wrong. She was quiet again. Then, I'm just glad you're home. I closed my eyes. Me too. We talked for another 20 minutes. She didn't lecture me, didn't say I told you so. She just listened. And when we finally hung up, she said, I'll call you tomorrow, okay? Just to check in. Okay. I love you, Dad. I love you too. I set the phone down and sat there in the silence of my house. It smelled stale. The yard was a mess. I had mail piling up and bills to pay and a bank account that made me sick every time I looked at it. But Brenda had said she'd call tomorrow, and that was more than I'd had in over a year. I got up and walked to the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror, really looked. I'd lost weight. My face was thinner, more lined. My eyes looked hollow. I looked like a man who'd gone to war and lost, but I was still here, still standing, still breathing. I didn't know if I'd ever get back what I'd lost. The money, maybe, if I lived carefully enough, but the time, the trust, the piece of myself I'd given away thinking it would be cherished, that was gone, and I'd never get it back. I turned off the light and went to bed. The sheets smelled like dust, the house creaked in the wind, and for the first time in months, I was completely, utterly alone. But this time, I knew it. I wasn't pretending anymore. Wasn't building fantasies. Wasn't convincing myself that age didn't matter or that love was enough or that someone halfway across the world saw something in me worth keeping. I was just an old man in an empty house trying to figure out how to keep going, and maybe that was enough. Maybe it had to be.